I'm here today to talk about the eMLS CBA presentation today. So thank you all so much for joining me. I want to start by talking about that we're talking about the financial viability of an eMLS team from the perspective of the Philadelphia Union. The world of esports is a rapidly growing industry. It's blown up, and combined with the rising popularity of soccer, soccer is the most popular sport amongst the younger population, the 18 to 35 population. There's been an explosion in popularity in the MLS, excuse me, and combine that with the popularity of esports throughout the country, we believe that a joint venture together would have the possibility of really bringing a lot of success to this joint venture. So EA's FIFA is also the most popular sports game franchise in the world, not just in the country, in the whole world, and one of the most popular video game series in the world as well, even outside of the sports realm. And we certainly believe that a joint venture between the Philadelphia Union and a newly founded franchised esports team could be mutually beneficial for both parties. There's been a lot of success amongst other esports leagues, such as the Overwatch League, the Call of Duty League, and the NBA 2K League. There's been a lot of success around franchised leagues where they are location-based. It kind of brings a more traditional sports feel, and that more traditional sports feel attracts not only strong esports fans, it also brings in crossover from traditional sports fans, as it is an easier to understand pathway as opposed to some other esports events which are more tournament style. Having a week-to-week league is more synonymous with traditional sports, and we think that has the potential to bring in those crossover fans who really like soccer but at the same time also really enjoy esports. And we think that and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, we think that there can be a potential crossover where some of those esports fans can transition into being Philadelphia Union fans, and some of those Philadelphia Union fans can transition into also being fans of Philadelphia Union's esports team. So a combination of both has the potential to make that much more success. So first, to talk about some of the pros of this venture. Obviously, one of the largest pros would be an additional revenue stream for the Philadelphia Union. We envision a team that is jointly owned by a team owner for the esports team itself, but then it would also be co-owned by the parent team, which in this case would be the Philadelphia Union. We also believe that there's an expansion of fan base, like we were mentioning, crossover from both sides. There's the potential for esports fans to come to the Union and vice versa. The live event revenue is also a pro. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. But similar to what some other leagues have done, obviously pre-COVID, was hosting live events, brings everyone together, can also make better merchandise revenue. It can bring in ticketing revenue, and just gives more brand awareness as well. Merchandise revenue, as mentioned, that's another pro. The merchandise revenue would likely be similar to the Union, but not exactly the same. Similar to the 2K League, where most of the teams have almost identical color schemes, but they are different team names, and that gives you the ability to have merchandise that is separate and different, but also similar, and can just add to the merchandise revenue as well. And then one of the other large pros is streaming and TV deals. Platforms like Twitch, YouTube in particular, those two have seen a lot of action from leagues like the Overwatch League, the Call of Duty League, as I mentioned, and the NBA 2K League. The NBA 2K League and the Overwatch League have actually both been featured on ABC, ESPN, and ESPN2. So having the potential for those TV deals as well would just be another additional revenue stream for both the eMLS team and the Philadelphia Union. So moving into some of the cons, obviously there's additional costs from the jump, such as paying the coach, paying the player salaries, as well as having proper tech and hardware. These things aren't cheap, but at the same time, if the team is successful, those costs can be outweighed very quickly, which we'll talk about a little bit more later when we get down to the nitty-gritty of some of the numbers. Another big con would be competing against other live sporting events and concerts in Philadelphia. Obviously, once we move past the pandemic, there's going to be a new explosion of live events. And in a city like Philadelphia, there's a lot to go to, different sports, different concerts, any other kind of venue. There's tons of venues in Philadelphia, tons of things going on any given night. So that's something, we're going to have to be competing against those other live events. As mentioned just a second ago, the potential COVID complications. It's hard to say how things are going to look over this next year or two with the progression of the pandemic. If things get under control sooner rather than later, we might be able to move on. But even after we move on, is there going to be a new normal? Are things going to be different? So that's something we have to consider as a potential con. And the last con would be the live venue costs. It's not easy or cheap to host live events in a venue. When you're paying for things like the venue itself, you're paying for event staff and things like that, and merchandise, and having booths, extra staffing. There's a lot that goes into having those live venue events. So moving on to talking about some of the stakeholders, the biggest three stakeholders we see. The eMLS organization would be one of the largest stakeholders. You have things like the players, the coaches, the owner, the event staff are all going to have a heavy stake in the team's operations. The Philadelphia Union itself will have a big stake in it, as it will be an additional revenue stream for them. So there will be for you rather. So there will be a certain level of support that will need to come from the Philadelphia Union via things like social media, and obviously there would be co-ownership of the team, and just general promotion at Philadelphia Union games, at the soccer games, where obviously there's more people than there would be at the events to start. So with that sort of joint representation between the two teams, gives the ability to have additional marketing and go for that crossover fan base that we talked about a little earlier. And then the last main stakeholder, would be the fan base itself. You have your esports fans, your soccer fans, and hopefully there can be that crossover that we've mentioned a couple of times. You're going to have people that are going to be diehard for esports. You're going to have people that are going to be diehard for soccer. But some of those diehard soccer fans who just want more soccer in their life, maybe will turn to something more non-traditional like esports, and then vice versa. People that really enjoy playing FIFA, maybe they haven't necessarily been into watching live soccer. If they have teams that support one another, such as the Philadelphia Union and the partner eMLS team, there would be an ability for even more of that crossover that we've already mentioned. So moving on to some of the risks and the risk assessment, the long-term impacts of COVID-19 on live venue events. We've already kind of talked about that a little bit, but just to dwell further on that, the new normal is something we have to think about. It's hard to say immediately what or how things are going to look, even when the pandemic is past or has slowed down, or has even gone. Will there still be precautions? Will we still have to be doing things like limiting attendance, social distancing, things like that? How long is it going to be until we get back to normal? Will live events ever look the same? Obviously, this pandemic is adjusting by the day, so we don't necessarily know exactly how things are going to look, but at the same time, we have to be prepared for whatever's necessary. Next thing would be the difficulty of attracting an initial fan base. There's a lot of options today. I mean, there's even from the perspective of not even just thinking about standard sports. There's so many esports, the leagues that have popped up, things like the Overwatch League, like the NBA 2K League, like the Call of Duty League, and then you have your more traditional esports, such as League of Legends and Dota and StarCraft, all these other games. There's just a lot for people to consume, and especially the youth and the youth base that we're really going to be reaching for. They span such a wide variety of ideals and things they enjoy and things they like to watch and things they like to do. So it'll certainly take a quality marketing effort to sort of try and reach that proper fan base in order for us to get things going. Fans impact virtually the entire revenue stream, and that's why it's such a big risk. If we can't bring in fans from the start, you're going to look at losses from a merchandise standpoint, from a ticket revenue standpoint. If fan numbers don't look good from the start, things like viewership, that's going to lessen any sort of future sponsorships or any sort of future streaming deals. It's just going to make life more difficult. So it's very, very important to grab those fans from the start, because it's much easier to get things going early than it would be to try to build a fan base after the fact. The last major risk is going to be the timing of the season. We want to be careful because we're looking to grab crossover from traditional sports fans. And obviously you have seasons like the NFL, the NBA, and obviously the MLS, we want to make sure that there's as little overlap as possible, specifically, especially with the MLS. But the NBA should also be in our sights too, as they are both very popular amongst the youth demographic. So it's very important that we time our season in a way that we wouldn't be potentially losing any more fans to those other events. Obviously, this is something to be more reliant on the entirety of the league, not necessarily on just the Philadelphia Union's eMLS team, but it's certainly something that's worth noting as we go forward with this venture. So moving on to going into the nitty-gritty of the numbers, talking about some of the benefits that we're going to see from the start. So sponsorships are far and away going to be the biggest benefit. Much in the way that we were talking about the youth and the youth consumption and things like that. Brands really cherish getting youth support specifically because young people are more loyal to the brands they choose, just in general. And then also in addition to that, if those youth get attached to one brand from the start because they support their eMLS team, there's a greater likelihood that those consumers are going to be with that brand for long periods of time. So sponsorships, especially amongst things that attract younger viewers, are really, really in demand. So that's going to be a very high revenue stream for the team. The streaming rights are going to be a big factor as well. The streaming rights come from a prediction, or from research of the streaming deal of something like the Overwatch League and some other comparable esports leagues. We divided the amount from that research in half, just because we're a new venture. This is something that's never been attempted before. And then from there, we divided that amount by 26. There are currently 26 MLS teams, so the streaming rights revenue would be split between all 26 of the eMLS teams as well. So that would give us an amount of $1,730,769.23. The next major revenue stream would be the merchandise revenue. We were not really able to find a comparable esports merchandise revenue amount. However, we did find the NBA merchandise revenue. And obviously, we needed to break it down for scale. The NBA is one of the biggest sports leagues in the world. We are obviously a brand new venture in a still establishing market, a still establishing industry. So we took the NBA's merch revenue for one season, divided it by 1,000 for scale, and then that gave us $500,000 for merchandise revenue. Moving on to ticket revenue. The venue that we would most likely be using for the eMLS team would be the Met. The Met has hosted, most recently, right before the pandemic hit, they hosted an Overwatch League event, so it would likely be a venue that we would be looking for. It has 3,500 seats, so assuming sellouts from game to game, obviously we want to hope for the best. The average Overwatch League ticket is $20, so we took that same average amount, you multiply that by 3,500, and then times it by half of our games, because we would assume half the games would be home, half the games would be away, and every team would play each other once in sort of a 25-week season. So we assume 12 home games. It gives us an amount of $840,000, which brings our total benefits to $16,070,769.20. So moving on to the costs. Obviously, the major costs from the start are going to be salaries. You're going to have your player salaries. So you're going to have 11 players playing at any given time in the game, just like a traditional soccer game. And the average Overwatch League salary is $35,000. So we use that same amount as a comparable esports league, multiply that by 11. But we also had 6 bench players, because obviously teams need to have players on retainer for substitutes, or if anything were to happen, things like that. So we have 17 players for the team, times that 35,000 gives us an amount of $595,000. Coaches, similar thing. Most esports teams have a head coach, an assistant coach, and an analytics coach, so a total of 3. Through our research, the average esports coach is looking at about a $40,000 salary, so we multiply that by 3, gives us $120,000. Home game venue costs. A similar venue size would cost about roughly $50,000 to rent and to use. So we multiply that by our 12 home games. That would give us a cost of $600,000. And our last major cost would be for the hardware and tech. So first, you would want to consider the PC itself. These are all um, industry standard estimates. So each PC would be about $1,173.90. Headphones $125, and the monitor $150. You add those up, multiply it by the 11 players, and that would give you $15,937.90, which brings the total cost to $1,330,937.90. So the net of those costs and benefits gives us a very healthy net gain of $14,739,831.30. So in conclusion, the preliminary CBA shows that this venture really has the potential to be greatly profitable. As we mentioned, fans are going to be a driving source of success or failure. Some of the things we mentioned, obviously, we were assuming sellouts for ticket revenue. Merchandise revenue is obviously going to be imperative on people buying that merchandise in the first place. So it's going to be very crucial that an active marketing campaign is put forward not only by the new eMLS team, but also by the Philadelphia Union to get those younger Philadelphia Union fans to say, hey, I have another way of supporting and enjoying my team. Um, Relatively low entry costs. The esports world is still growing. It's not like trying to establish a league like the XFL or a comparable like basketball league or a comparable soccer league where you have to compete with those really high salaries. The salaries for esports players and coaches are still at a relatively low level overall, so that provides really not many barriers to entry. And the last point we want to make overall, it's high risk but high reward. The potential is certainly there from things like sponsorships, streaming rights. That stuff can really go for a pretty penny. And it's very important, again, that we engage fans from the start. So the risk is high, but we think the reward is even higher. And we hope this is a project that the team will consider taking on. So thank you all so much for your time, and thanks again.